Steve, how you doing, mate?
I'm doing well, fella.
Steve, when I look at you, I see a nationalist. I also see a globalist or a global citizen. I think I'm triggering you now, aren't I? How are you? And how's things in your world?
Why do you think you're triggering me? Is it because I've just pulled my balaclava down and have pulled out my route map to come and find you?
Well, I saw you getting the glue out. Were you going to glue yourself to the tree or something?
Yeah, that's right, something like that. No, I'm very well, thank you, Mark. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you, sir. Just thinking about Gandhi. He was a citizen for the ages. And it just made me think about, well, what citizens are we? Are we national, regional, global? In other words, should we care about what's happening 10,000 miles the other side of the world?
Yeah, and it's a very good question. Should we care? I think we should care. Should we get involved in a global perspective? We should get involved, but when should we get involved? I think that's the key for me. It's not that we shouldn't get involved in things, it's when should we be involved. When I think back to the Second World War, not that I was there at the time, but when I think back to the little bit I know about it, I think that we could have probably got involved earlier and tried to nip things in the bud earlier when we start to see things get a little bit out of hand.
We're all clever in hindsight.
Exactly. So it's not that I don't think that we should get involved globally. I think that we should be perhaps a little bit more wiser, astute as to when we get involved. Don't go in too early, don't leave it too late. Arrive precisely when we're meant to, like every good wizard.
That's right. Well, the thing is, at the time, it was appeasement.
Yeah.
They'd had the terrible First World War, and no one wanted to revisit that. And in some instances, some countries couldn't because of the lack of manpower. It would have taken them far many years. That's brilliant English, isn't it? Far longer to even consider going to war. And that was the dread. Do we want to go through this again? So, yeah, they tried to stave off the inevitable as long as possible.
Because they didn't recognise and they didn't read the temperature in the room properly. And that's something that concerns me today, that we haven't read the room very well. We haven't read the temperature in the room. I mean, look at the rise of Adolf Hitler as he came through that system. How did he come to power? How was he allowed to come to power? Why was he voted into power overwhelmingly by the German people? This all speaks to me of being a nationalist or being a globalist or being a global citizen, which is what you sort of kicked that conversation off with. Personally, I think that there are pros to being nationalist, but there are also pros to being a good citizen of the globe. If by being a globalist we mean being a good citizen of the globe, then I'm all for it. If we mean by being globalist making humanity into a homogenised blob that is overrun by a very small group of elites who sit at the very pinnacle, then I'm completely opposed to it. If we mean by nationalism being proud in your background, your culture, your nation, your people, the land on which you stand, and cheering on your rugby or soccer team, then I'm very, very up for that. If it means that you defend your shores against invaders and marauders, then I'm very up for being a nationalist. If what we mean by nationalism is hating everybody who's an outsider and a foreigner, then I'm very much against it.
Well, that's what nationalism has come to mean, hasn't it?
Which is sad, because that's not what nationalism should be.
Yeah, but it's also ridiculous, because what do you mean by nation?
That's another topic, isn't it?
Yeah, think about going back to 1870. There's no Germany. There's a federation of states who all speak German. It didn't come into being until they'd won a war against France, Prussia. And then at Versailles declared the Union of Germany. So where was the boundary at that point? Who were Germans? Well, there weren't any. There were German-speaking people, but there was no Germany. So what did it mean then to be a nationalist then? In effect, you're talking about Prussia.
Yeah.
So imagine Prussia, then all these little small dukedoms around them. Arbitrarily on a map, there was a line that if you stood up to, you were Prussian, but if you took one more foot over a line that you couldn't see, and they were still speaking the same language and they looked like you, but now you're in a different country, you suddenly think that's nonsense. It's like if you knew no different between Belgium and France and you happen to go across the border, how would you know? So when we talk about nationalism, it's like, well, who are you talking? Because what nationalism hides is not only the hatred of others, but hatred of people in their own nation. So I'm always interested in this kind of conflict that people have in their head when they say or they feel they're a nationalist. Are you? What does that mean?
So what do you think then of the old adage, when in Rome, do as the Romans? So let's say you come to Britain, New Zealand, America. You're not American, you're not British, you're not a Kiwi, and you come to that nation to form your home there. And you say, no, I'm not doing that, and I'm not living according to your rules, and I'm not doing what you want me to do because I am whatever ethnic background I am from, and I am going to now impose my will and my way on your land, where you've got your rules, you've got your religious beliefs, you've got your doctrines, you've got your institutions that underpin the society that has grown up over possibly, well, certainly hundreds, but possibly even thousands of years. How do you see those people?
But has a group of people done that? Have they tried to come in and say we're no longer following the rules and the traditions of this country?
Oh, whether they have in New Zealand, they certainly have at various levels. So an example I could give you would be Sharia law, where there are groups that want to run their communities under Sharia law. Now,
but can they?
Well, they do.
Oh.
They do, because they impose penalties and they push out sanctions and they do things which would not be allowed under the civil law. So, and you get that in the UK. You get that massively in the UK, where you have honour killings and all sorts of things, extrajudicial killings, which go against the law of the land.
Are there Christian examples like cults that do their own biblical interpretation of law in New Zealand?
There are places that would, well, again, you've got to define what you mean by Christian. If you're using a proof text of the English translation of the King James Version as your proof text, and then reading it like that and saying, yeah, you've got to define what you mean by Christian, I suppose. But if technically, i.e., they follow the Bible, therefore they profess to be Christian, there are places in New Zealand that would do that, I'm sure. I mean, you've got Gloria Vale is one place that comes immediately to mind, where they are a what I would say, if not a cult, they're certainly a sect that have a very bizarre way of looking at things and doing things, in my opinion. Maybe people that are very happy there. I doubt very much they'll be listening to us talk on our podcast.
Because you see, there's gated communities in nearly all countries, and what they do in there has always been an issue, because there's always going to be a group of people who want to be different to everyone else around them. There was a place in Dartmoor. It was full of people who wanted a simple life, and they created this community. No one was allowed in unless they were invited, and probably not even then. And they kept very much to themselves. And you could argue nunneries and abbeys were very similar at certain points. The debate is always how much control can a nation have over those people, because they could become a problem within, like an enclave within a country. But I don't think that necessarily happens. I don't think I've ever come across somebody who suddenly turn around and say, oh, we're going to secede from the country and we're going to be our own little nation. That happened in Italy, of course. At the unification, San Marino refused to join and was its own polity within a country around it. That was their choice. It happens. The Vatican did exactly the same. But I don't know of any example where people have come in and they've said, F you to the government, we're going to run our own little country. But they will certainly follow their own traditions and religion and whatever. I know that. That seems to be a problem for people that they come amongst. I can understand that as well, and I can understand the strife that happens with that. But that's happened throughout history. It's not just new.
Oh, nothing's new.
And we're in a position now where we've got great mobility.
Yep.
And when the world goes into a period of great unrest and violence, people are going to try and get away. The question is, are they legitimate refugees, and are you going to take them in? In fact, we did a thing on Gandhi, didn't we? And one of his great quotations was, you can tell the quality of a country by how it treats its animals. Well, you could substitute that by saying how it treats refugees.
And further still, I'd say you can distill it to how it treats its elderly and its young.
Exactly. So that's an individual question that all countries must face. If America hadn't gone down that route of accepting, it wouldn't be a modern country as it is today. So there's benefits, but I think mainly what we have to be against or to try and understand is why people don't want that to happen and why they see it as a problem.
I think if it divides the unity of a nation, however that nation has been carved out on the map, and however that nation is now calls itself, so Germany, which was obviously Prussia with all of those little kingdoms that made up that whole area, if a group of people, a growing group of people, come into the country who then undermine the unity of what that established German nation is, that's not a good thing. It's also not a good thing to then target those people, to eliminate them from your country. So it's a case of how do you assimilate people into the country so that they become Kiwis rather than Kiwis have to become like them. Because if you're coming to a country, I think that you should assimilate. I mean, you and I have assimilated into this country. Now, it may well be easier for us because we're English speaking, and maybe that's an advantage that we have. But we have assimilated into it. And there are many hundreds and thousands of people of all different backgrounds and races that have assimilated into New Zealand. But we sit under the same flag. We sit, and I use that as an analogy, the flag, whether you agree with the type
Do
of
they
flag.
have a flag?
No flag, no country.
You said once when you went to a court and the judge stopped it and they were talking about families doing horrible things to each other.
Yeah.
And they said, look, this is not a court of morals, this is a court of law.
You're correct.
So of all the things that foreign people who come into a country do, how much is moral or how much is legal that they're trying to usurp or take over? That's the first question. And of course, there is redress if they aren't refusing to follow the law of the land. The law of the land is bigger than they are, if it's the majority's will. So if they're not prepared to, for instance, follow the road code, they can go fishing off the beach and take all the fish, regardless of the quotient that should be catched, then they should be arrested and dealt with by the due force of law. But if it's because they come from a culture where they can squat down on a toilet and leave certain residue, which the people probably local wouldn't, that's different. That's a different aspect. And that just has to be dealt with over time. Half the problem, I think, is that the issue is when they don't look like us or they don't speak like us. That's, in some people's minds, that's the main problem. So you think of the simple thing about Shakespeare, and imagine there's going to be a film and they want to bring in Hamlet, and they've opened it to all people who can speak English. And somebody turns up and they've got a clipped English accent because they're from England. There's a Scotsman, there's a Welshman, there's an Irishman, there's a Canadian, American, South African, Australian, New Zealander, and an Indian. And they all say the lines perfectly, but which one's going to be considered to be better for the role? Because there's some accents, until recently, would never get taken on. Well, that's not anything but the way you speak. And after all, we're all the same. We've all got the same, 99.9% of us are all the same. The only difference is really the skin colour or the eyes, isn't there? There's not much difference between one human and another. What seems to upset people are not more than a lot of physical or cultural things. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I'm not sure that I would agree with you 100%. I would agree with you in obviously our similarities. There is far more that unites us than splits us up. There is far more that is in our favour as common traits of humanity. Are you looking to represent what a multicultural society looks like today in the 21st century by using actors of different skin tones, different genders, different voice intonations? Or are you looking to try and present what the author, the writer of that particular thing had in mind? So if you know that Ian Fleming was making James Bond as a white English commander in the Royal Navy, and you're looking to do a film about James Bond, and you're wanting to be true to the authorial intent of the writer, then you would use a white English man of a certain age, a certain build, a certain stature to accurately reflect the character that Fleming was writing about in his books. Now, if that then doesn't appease modern day society, well, that's unlucky. The author wasn't trying to appease modern day society. He was trying to present a character in his time. So I'm not sure that that argument would be right in terms of, Shakespeare and who you'd pick. The writing of Shakespeare would have been about a male and a female relationship. And so he would have had a picture of a woman in mind. And so therefore I would expect a woman to play the part of Juliet if they were being authentic to the intent of Shakespeare, not the social construction at the time as to whether a female could act or not act. But should that role, which if you want to be provocative and if you want to be inclusive in this DEI environment that we currently live in today, with promoting diversity, equity and inclusion and all the rest of it, then you could have two guys, one Romeo, one Juliet. You could have two women, one Romeo, one Juliet. You can mix it up however you want to. But if you're going to be actually try and be true to the text to the best of your understanding, and true to the characterization, then I think you should use people that look like the people. So I don't like the fact, going back donkey's years, where a white man was blackened up to play a black guy.
Yeah, that's right.
So absolutely. I don't think that's right. So I think that they should have cast, if this particular part is about a black dude, then get a flipping black dude to play it. But if it's about a white dude, then get a white dude to play it. What's the problem here?
You've also got to be careful, because in The Merchant of Venice, Portia dresses up as a man and goes into the court to get Antonio freed from Shylock. Now, what if it was reversed? A man had to dress up as a woman to do the same.
You'd say they were a Royal Marine.
It's Sod's Opera.
It's Sod's Opera. What's the problem?
Monty Python's the same.
That's
it's
right.
Like, well, that is culture, isn't it? Here's us talking about, for instance, men should never dress in a certain way. We'll say that to the Scots. They're wearing kilts, which is no different to a plaid skirt. So it's what you accept and what you become used to. It's like if you're not used to food that's really hot, spicy, you're not going to enjoy it at first. And you'll consider it, no, not having that foreign muck. But effectively, you can educate your palate. Well, you can educate your cultural
Your cultural palate.
Your cultural palate.
Yes.
And the cultural palate is all coloured.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
You talked about, can we have a black person playing a white person? Of course, that caused furore about 3 years ago when Anne Boleyn was cast as a black woman. And it is true, it kind of, at first, you're thinking, hang on, are they going to have Nelson next as a Chinese? Well, like the woman said, he said, surely it's down to the person who can act it better. So it's down to the culture. Are there cultures that don't want to have different coloured people imposing on certain roles? Absolutely. But what does that say? Really, what does it say?
And I am not saying that somebody of colour or somebody of a different ethnicity couldn't act the part of James Bond as well as Daniel Craig. Of course they could.
No one can do it better than Daniel Craig.
Of course they could. I'm talking about who was Ian Fleming writing? Who was his character? He was a white naval officer who was a flipping nightmare man.
Okay. What colour skin was Jesus?
I would imagine, having never hung out with him, but I would imagine that he would have been the same olive-skinned man that all of his people around him were. And
do you think most Christians accept that?
Yeah, well, most Christians need to actually understand who the God is they worship, a Jewish Messiah.
Exactly. We are culturally blind sometimes. We blind ourselves. We're all citizens of the same planet. What do the Maoris say? We're all in the same waka.
Yep, unless you're not.
Well, some people don't want to be. That is the problem.
I think that one of the beauties of humanity is its diversity. It is different.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. One of the things that I loved so much when we were serving together in the Royal Navy is going around to see all of these different countries in far-flung parts of the globe when it was still not as accessible as it is today. When overseas travel, Far East travel, was the thing that would never happen unless you were a serviceman, probably. And I think that going and meeting people of different backgrounds, seeing how they do things differently, I think that adds so much colour to the world that we live in. But that doesn't mean to say that I don't think we should be proud of who we are in the country that we live in and what that country represents. And I think we should. And I think that so much is said at the moment that you shouldn't be proud, and especially if you're white and you're male and you're a certain age, you shouldn't be proud of anything, and you're just you're full of toxic masculinity. I just do not consider that helpful to anybody now or in the future. And I don't think it's right, this sort of way of speaking about people. So I don't think we should all be the same. I think we should be proud to be who we are. We should be proud to live in the land that we live in, and we should be good citizens of the globe, but we shouldn't be globalized.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do agree with that. I don't think we want the world to become the same. One, it'll be boring, and two, almost impossible, because eventually when you get to one culture, then what do you want to make the same next? That's a thing that never stops. There's always somebody who wants to control, and the only way they can control is by making us change into the image that they want. Yeah. And this is the problem. This is the one thing we could learn from Scripture. We're in the image of God, and we're all in the image of God, so stop trying to change everything. And yet, it always, and the first way of doing that is belittling others. You know, I've said before, I don't know if I've said it on this channel, but I am an atheist, but I believe in God. And one of the truest things ever written is in the Bible. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might and all your strength, and your neighbour as yourself.
As one who is like you.
So we need to start remembering that. Because it seems that the chorus has gone quiet and they've almost forgotten their lines.
Yeah. No, I totally agree, mate. We've got a lot that we could learn. We've got a lot that we can benefit from. And but I do hope that we retain our differences.
But saying that, even though I live in New Zealand and I'm a Kiwi, I'm proud of my British heritage.
Yeah, likewise.
So I guess we're both national and global, and that's not a contradiction. I don't think it should be.
No, both and. It's not either or.
Anything to add? Because I'd hate to think I've bludgeoned you into quietude.
No, you haven't bludgeoned me, old mate. No, you need to bludgeon a bit harder than that.
Oh, right. Okay, another great topic.
Take care, fella.
For now.
Later. Bye-bye.